We'll be devoting our entire program to an investigation into an appalling case of corporate thuggery and deception. We'll be revealing acts of harassment, lying, even cover-up by Australia's most profitable company. A company which can make or break your business, Telstra. Because every time you make a local phone call, you totally rely on Telstra for it to get through. If the phones don't work, you go broke. And if that sounds too simple, we're about to show you a number of small businesses which have been destroyed by constant phone problems. When they asked Telstra for help, they were lied to, bullied by lawyers and Telstra executives. In some cases, their calls were secretly bugged. But it goes further, as John Hanrahan discovered when he looked into the way a model corporate citizen does business.
Steve Brady runs a car rental business in Brisbane and depends heavily on the telephone. For 5.5 years, he's been plagued with problems.
Mainly what happens is the client on the other end dials our number, and the phone rings as far as they're concerned, but it doesn't ring here. They also get the recorded message, this number is no longer connected. The phones here, instead of going ring, ring, go dink. So if you're not close enough to them, you don't hear it. It's a summary of all the problems we've had.
When Telecom refused to admit there was a problem, Steve started keeping a log.
Some days, as you can see from the larger paragraphs, it's worse. I think he was going, and here's a day here where we had so much, we in the end gave up and thought we might as well go out of business.
Steve Brady and others like him call themselves cot cases, casualties of Telecom. Telecom's initial reaction to their complaints has often been to deny there's a problem.
Oh, the most famous one is the one that was given to me personally twice, but had I considered that one of our competitors was coming into the office when we weren't in it, leaning over the desk and reprogramming our phone so all the calls went to him. There's the other one where they've asked women if they're wearing nylon underwear because nylon underwear will make the phones go haywire.
What you're about to see is evidence of a systematic, endemic and arguably malicious campaign by Australia's largest non-private organisation against a number of Australian small businesses. The campaign has cost the small businesses in total tens of millions of dollars, closed some of them, and seriously affected the health of individuals involved. In the course of this investigation, we've come across scores of small business people with Telstra horror stories.
We probably lost about $500,000 in revenue directly due to telecom network faults.
Financially, we're all but ruined. We don't own a thing except the registered business name.
We had no business to sell. We were left with no business to sell.
We've lost all our properties, and a total of 6 that belong to us and our company have gone, plus my own mother's house.
The 3 businesses within the structure. We're in party hire, jukebox hire and catering. We've lost the business, we've lost our income, our livelihood. We've lost a lot of our personal possessions. My wife had inheritance, she's lost that. We had a lot of antiques, we've been flogging those off at auction.
If Telecom had resolved the Purton Smith's complaints, the family might still be intact. Telecom's refusal to acknowledge their problems has brought the family to the point of collapse.
My son has been on his 21st birthday. I had to stop him from trying to hang himself. My younger daughter, who's 15, she's not showing anything at the moment, but she's been hurt a lot.
You couldn't put a price on what's happened to the children and the animals and the people.
What about you?
I'll be okay if they're okay, but we have nowhere to live. We have nothing left. There's nothing left that anyone can take. So I guess that's good news.
The telecommunications watchdog Austel conducted an inquiry into Telstra's treatment of its customers. In a scathing report, it called Telstra a less-than-model corporate citizen. That was last year, and now a former Austel executive, Amanda Davis, is adamant that things have not changed.
Corporate thuggery is the expression that comes to mind.
My legal costs at the moment has cost me $170,000. I lost my wife of 20 years. She walked out with the stress.
Alan Smith, who's struggling to run a holiday camp in Victoria, has been fighting Telstra for 7 years.
I haven't got left what it would to buy a suburban home in Melbourne, and it's cost me $1.2 million.
Because of Telstra's stonewalling tactics, Alan Smith resorted to the Freedom of Information Act to access documents for his compensation claims. Telstra's supposed to supply them within 30 days, but it's often taken 90, and they might just as well not have bothered.
These are the type of FOIs I got, like that, one after the other. And
In Alan Smith's case, Telecom's delaying tactics had a devastating effect.
10 days after my appeal time had elapsed, Telstra supplies me 700 documents, and 3 of the documents state that Mr. Smith's testing on his service proved that these test calls did not work. Test calls unsuccessful. I gave up tests. Unsuccessful.
What we've got to realise here is that we are dealing with a large number of documents.
Steve Black is Telstra's media man.
Well, there have been some criticisms of us, both by the Commonwealth Ombudsman and by the claimants themselves, of our performance in respect of our FOI. We've accepted those criticisms, we've acted on the recommendations of the Commonwealth Ombudsman, and we have put in place new processes to ensure that those problems don't keep occurring.
Telecom's new ads are warm and friendly, but legal correspondence which we've obtained shows a very different attitude to customer complaints. Their solicitors, Freehill, Hollingdale and Page, advised not to directly or indirectly admit liability or fault on the part of Telecom. Did the corporation adhere to that legal advice by one of the leading law firms in Australia?
At that time, there was an issue there with us dealing with the law firm, and that may well have been the situation at that time.
So you're saying that this particular advice is no longer adhered to by the corporation?
What I'm saying to us has been substantial changes in the whole basis on which the corporation acts.
But have they changed? People who deal with Telstra's victims think not.
They will do anything, throw any amount of money, task forces, lawyers, at resisting a reasonable sit around the table and come to a settlement.
After the break, we'll meet more unhappy customers and hear how the corporation resorted to lies.
They lied to the Ombudsman, they lied to the police, they lied to the Minister, they lied to the Senators.
Anne Garms used to run a theatre restaurant in Brisbane until her telephone problems almost sent her to the wall. Like other Telstra casualties, she resorted to FOI in her battle to win compensation. When the documents arrived, 50,000 of them, they showed that Telecom had been lying.
Every time I lodged a complaint with an external agency, Telecom then lied to them. They lied to the Ombudsman, they lied to the police, they lied to the Minister.
At the height of her battle with Telstra, Anne suspected her phone was being tapped.
I had complained to the Ombudsman, to the Australian Federal Police and to the Minister that Telecom was in fact listening and taping our phone calls. Telecom denied that at all times.
In fact, the FOI documents revealed Telecom had taped thousands of calls and they'd been listening to Anne's conversations for some time. And when Melbourne businessman Colin Turner complained to Telecom, they lied to him too in writing.
The Telecom policy was to tell the casualties of Telecom people and difficult network fault people like myself that they had no liability or responsibility to pay any compensation whatsoever.
Questions of liability. What has Telstra said to you?
They've actually lied.
Deborah Dawson's husband Gary runs a pest control business in Melbourne. Like many others, they were told in writing that Telecom was not liable under the law. But the truth was, the law had been changed 2 years previously.
In 1991, those immunities were withdrawn and Telecom were answerable.
Does Telecom or Telstra and its new guys lie to its customers?
Well, Telecom and its old guys and Telstra and its new guys does not lie to its customers. I guess there could be an occasion where somebody does something that the company wouldn't countenance.
But that was an amazing error to make 2 years after the Act was changed, and this is a person in a management role at Telstra. Putting this in writing, no less.
Clearly that person was not aware of the implications of the new Act, and that person responded in accordance with the requirements of the old Act.
So have you taken this back now to Telstra and put this in front of them to say that you now know that they are liable?
Yes, and when we asked him where he got his information from, he told us we could buy copies of the Act for $187 if we were interested.
Brian and Denise Love are another small business couple who say Telecom ruined them. And, like other victims, they had to resort to FOI to fight their case. Telecom's own correspondence revealed its deceit.
You would find things, that conversations you had had with Telecom where they were saying you were wrong, and in actual fact you were right, but they were denying this all this time, and now the FOI has come out. We were right, but that's too bad because we've now lost everything and it's later down the track.
The Loves are now leasing back the restaurant they used to own and trying to rebuild the business. The years of phone problems were bad enough, but the stress of fighting Telstra has wreaked a devastating personal toll.
We have always had a very good reputation and name, and I don't know how we'll ever be able to get that back. And it just goes on. Our family is just torn apart.
I have not seen a daughter of mine for 3 years. My son can no longer live with us because of the stress levels in our household.
And there are now calls for a Senate inquiry into Telstra's behaviour. After the break, we'll see how the corporation tried to influence politicians to prevent that happening.
I think Telecom think they're bigger than Parliament, and if you're bigger than Parliament, they must think they're bigger than Australia.
Despite lengthy arbitration and even an investigation by the Ombudsman, which resulted in a public rebuke, many of Telstra's victims believe justice won't be done until a full Senate inquiry has been conducted. But as we've discovered, Telstra wants to avoid that at all costs.
And the 1995 Telstra Small Business of the Year is Penbio, Queensland.
The Small Business Awards in Melbourne, and a chance for Telstra to brush up its somewhat tarnished image. Telstra sponsored the awards, and the guests had a rare chance to see the corporation's chief executive, Frank Blount, in the flesh.
We deal in Telstra with more small businesses, I suspect, than anyone else in Australia.
Blount's message is that Telstra might be big, but they do care.
This is not just words, ladies and gentlemen. We believe we've got to be responsible corporate citizens.
Has it ever been Telstra's policy in any way to try to put pressure or persuade the people putting together reports to alter those reports or change them in any way at all?
Definitely not.
At all, in any way, shape or form?
There was one letter in respect of the Coopers and Lybrand report, which you may be about to raise.
We are indeed. Coopers and Lybrand were commissioned by Telecom to write a report on the handling of the COT cases, which turned out to be highly critical. For Telecom, that was unacceptable. This letter from the Group Managing Director said, "I believe it should be pointed out to Coopers and Lybrand that unless this report is withdrawn and revised, their future in relation to Telecom may be irreparably damaged." Well, how can you explain or justify that sort of an attitude from a senior management person?
What I can say is that Coopers and Lybrand went on with a very strong and close relationship with Telstra and developed new complaints management and fault management procedures which are now in place throughout the corporation.
Well, I'm sure they did, but of much greater concern, obviously, to the millions of Telstra customers is this kind of a corporate attitude from one of the senior management people. How can it be justified?
Well, it's not appropriate for me to speak on that, John, at this stage.
Was anything ever said to Mr. Campbell about this? Was he ever carpeted by senior
John,
people?
I'm not aware of the circumstances of that particular case. It was before I was involved in these particular matters, so I can't deal with it with you today.
Is it a commercial, is it rather an acceptable way for a management person to act?
John, I have no knowledge of this. It was before I was involved with this process.
But you acknowledge that you did know about it. You were aware of it before I actually read it out.
I was aware of the existence of the letter. That was all I was aware of in respect.
Well, Mr. Campbell is still in this position as a group managing director. I mean, is that an acceptable way for somebody in that position to act on a commercial basis?
That's a question you should perhaps address to Mr. Campbell.
Well, we'd certainly like to address it, actually. What about you? Have you ever attempted to influence the situation in any way at all?
In respect of...
well, in just the process of the COT cases and the arbitration and so on?
Certainly not, John. In fact...
But that's not what these documents reveal. When an independent arbitrator, Gordon Hughes, was trying to sort out some of the customers' disputes with Telecom, an executive wrote in an internal memo, "My course, therefore, is to force Gordon Hughes to rule on our preferred rules of arbitration." That executive was Steve Black. Force Gordon Hughes? How do you force an arbitrator? It was, as you say, independent.
A poor choice of words, perhaps, John, but it simply refers to the fact of seeking from the arbitrator a view on those things. on those matters that arose.
I'd say with a very poor choice of words. Would you use that phrase again?
Well, certainly not.
So the better people communicate, the better it is for business, not to mention Australia's balance of trade.
The line constantly being put forward by Telstra these days is that they might have been bad boys in the past, but now all that's changed. However, we've found there are still plenty of angry customers out there.
The message is that I still haven't got an answer on whether or not we can run a risk of being electrocuted by a 55-volt leak on the phone line.
Colin Turner has been fighting Telstra for 8 years. You could say that Colin's a trifle obsessed.
Now, I'm a little bit concerned about that. And I don't want to be sitting in my office looking like an idiot with a tea towel wrapped around my phone because of this voltage leak.
Today, Colin's had a win. He's managed to videotape a Telstra technician discovering a fault in his lines.
Oh, that's gone right up, isn't it? Yeah. What's that on now?
It's 50-55.
Jesus.
See how it's moving?
Yeah.
See how it's moving?
Now, to the Telstra executive who says that all of these problems are in the past, that they're history, what do you have to say?
He doesn't know what he's talking about. He has got no idea.
Are you exaggerating this because it's part of their defence that it's being blown right out of all proportions?
Well, I keep saying to Telstra, for God's sake, come down and witness them for yourself. This morning, just this morning, I've had 2 ANV faults. That's answer, no voice. In the 2-hour period, there have been over 200 faults have come in and been logged.
Not surprisingly, there have been consistent calls for a Senate inquiry into Telstra's conduct. A Senate investigation would have far-reaching powers, but as a confident, it's headed progress towards avoidance of a Senate inquiry. It details how a special Telstra team lobbied Parliament. That document seems to be a scorecard to tell whether or not you're heading in their direction. Is that how you see it?
Yes, it is how I'd interpret it. Now, I'd expect Telstra to do that sort of thing, and I'd expect anybody who wanted a certain outcome, I guess, to do that sort of thing.
But Senator Bourne didn't expect to be lied to. Telstra executives assured her there were absolutely no difficulties with the network. The clot problems could not happen.
But much of what I was told was just completely untrue.
I think Telecom think they're bigger than Parliament, and if you're bigger than Parliament, they must think they're bigger than Australia.
This is the man Telstra's campaign was aimed at. They said of Senator Ron Boswell, he is very unlikely to be placated by rational argument.
I think it's very foolish, though, to write some of these things down, particularly when they're very unpleasant, and what they say about Senator Boswell in particular is quite unpleasant, and I think quite unfair.
The document says they are attempting to ensure that Senator Boswell is unable to muster the support he needs within other political parties to enable him to force a Senate inquiry.
No organisation in this country is bigger than the people and the Parliament that serves the people.
Well, certainly there have been briefings of senators, but I wouldn't quite put the connotations on it that you're putting on it there.
Well, what connotations could we put on it?
The briefings of the senators were very positive briefings to outline to them exactly where the processes were, where the arbitration was at, what Telstra's role was in the process, etc.
The heading of this says progress toward avoidance of a Senate inquiry.
At one stage, there were a number of people in the Senate calling for a Senate inquiry, and I guess there were some questions around.
Meanwhile, Colin Turner has been busy with his camera again, and it looks like at last he's getting some action. Remarkably, 2 days after assuring him there was no problem, Telstra technicians turned out in force to fix that voltage leak he'd reported. He often wonders why dealing with Telstra has to be so difficult.
I see a very, very simple solution. They should admit that from time to time there will be some service difficulties on the phones.
What is it going to take, though, to get Telecom to that point and solve the problem?
I believe it'll take a full Senate inquiry.
It seems to me that the only thing that brings them to heel a little is the threat of an inquiry, and I think that's the only way to go now.
One after the other, and the Commonwealth
Commonwealth Ombudsman's Office is well aware.
I'm concerned that a number of small business people in Australia just aren't getting a fair go from Australia's largest corporate citizen.